Hello, today is Thursday, March 4th, 2021. My name is Evan Solis. I'm interviewing Gigi or Gilda Pedraza for the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Ms. Pedraza, that this interview will be placed in the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection at UT Austin. If there's anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there's something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. Because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting. So I'll ask you a series of 5 questions. Please say, yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each one. There are 2 questions we need to make sure you agree to before we go on. 1, Voces wishes to archive your interview along with any other photographs and other documentation at the Benson Library at UT Austin. We will retain copyright of the interview and any other materials you donate to Voces. Do you give Voces consent to archive your interview and your materials at the Benson Library?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Do you grant Voces copyright over the interview and any material you provide?
Yes.
Thank you. And do you agree to allow us to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes.
Okay, and then 2 more questions. So we have many questions in a pre-interview form that you and I already filled out. That was very difficult for us, but we filled most of it out. We use that information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server. Before we send it to the Benson, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or family members, so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at the Benson Library. Do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at the Benson?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And then last question. On occasion, Voces receives requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
Email only.
Email only. Okay, good to know. All right. Well, excellent. Well, thank you. So that being done, let me close this real quick. So as I had mentioned, this is, for the Voces Oral History Center, we're doing a project called Voces of a Pandemic, specifically documenting the experience of Latinas and Latinos in the US during this pandemic. And I'm specifically speaking to people who are involved in politics in one way or another. But just before we begin, I just want to ask you to, in your own words, if you can introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you come from, and what you do.
Gigi Pedraza. I was actually born in Canada, but all my family and I consider myself Peruvian because we spent all my life in Peru. I'm a mom, I'm a wife, I am a feminist. I am the founder and the executive director of the Latino Community Fund in Georgia. And I spend my days making sure that we facilitate and create opportunities for families and for member organizations and for students and workers to pursue their dreams in Georgia.
Yeah, I have to say, from all the people I've spoken with, I think you may have the most international background because you're born in Canada, you went to school in Peru, also in the Canary Islands.
Spain,
right?
Yeah.
Spain, right? And then you've, sorry, that's my dog. But sorry, the joys of working from home. You have a dog in the background. So I want to ask you a lot about your professional work, your work with Latino Community Fund, your work as a political organizer. But to begin, I just want to talk about the pandemic and its impact on you and your life and your community. And so my first question is, was there a moment or an event that sticks out to you in your mind if you reflect on a year ago when you think, or that you think, that was the moment when I realized, oh yes, this is going to be a serious thing, and this is like, this pandemic is not going to be something that is just a 1-week deal. Does anything stick out in your mind and in your life that happened to you that made you think that?
I think that because my personal life is so interconnected to the work that I do, I think when the governor of Georgia was very clear that there was not going to be a mask mandate, and that, the greatest concern was to protect businesses from lawsuits. It was very apparent to me that nothing was going to change fast enough to think that we were going back, to the office after 8 weeks and we were going back to normal. I think that, personally, I mean, many things have happened, but I think when the governor, in March announced that, and then he said that, they had just learned that COVID was, I guess, mitigated by wearing masks and stuff. When it was, I mean, we all knew, if you watched the news, right? It was just apparent that there was no political will necessarily, and the determination, right, to take the measures that were needed for the virus to not grow out of control. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's depending on who you speak with, that seems to be a situation that repeats itself across the country, right? In every state and every locality, and very politicized. How would you compare? So, if I remember correctly, you're in Atlanta. So, how would you compare and contrast the response of, for example, Mayor Lance Bottoms, their Democrat, versus Governor Kim's Republican response? Was the local response, and how did it differ? And was there pushback? Was there tension between the elements of government?
Yeah, there was. I mean, and it was not only Mayor Lance Bottoms, it was, diverse cities, right, to different stances. I think the problem, there was a challenge between balancing, local political, will and control and decision making with, a state and then a federal, dynamic, because it became a political, power struggle. So yes, some jurisdictions, the local cities took some decisions, and then the governor basically said those were, it was, the mask mandates were unenforceable, and that, of course, the governor had an authority that superseded those of cities, and then the federal government, right, had also their own positions, which were very lax. So there was a lot of confusion that created a lot of confusion in our community. For example, my address, right, it's Atlanta, but I am not within city of Atlanta. So for folks that, many people in Georgia, they say they live in Atlanta. They don't actually live in city of Atlanta. It's like, living in New York, most people don't really live within city of New York. So there was a lot of confusion. Should I wear a mask? Should I not wear a mask? Until when am I allowed to go out? Can I host a birthday party on this block, but not on the next block? So, let's just go to the other restaurant on the following block. So it created a lot of confusion. It created a lot of problems for us also as community organizations to, share what message was accurate, because depending where you were, your message, varied. And it was a big problem, and it is still a big problem, right? When you have a governor in one state saying that, the state is going to be completely open, and then there's people that travel through states, because those lines are imaginary lines. They're not physical barriers between states. And the same happened with farm workers, right? In Georgia, farm workers sometimes move from states, depending on what crops are available, carrying virus and carrying, a lot of, illnesses, because sometimes in Georgia, they don't have access to, but maybe in North Carolina, they would, or they have other protections. So it's the reality of the, this is a transnational, multi-state, reality. Yeah.
Yeah, very complex, right? A lot of different elements. So I know here in Texas, Latino communities in particular have been hit very hard. So in the south of our state, areas that are heavily majority Latino, have been disproportionately impacted. And even here in Austin and throughout the state, disproportionate infection rates and disproportionate death rates among the Latino communities. Has that been the same in Georgia, where you are, Latinos, minorities in general? And why do you think, if so, what do you think are the factors that contribute to that?
Yeah, absolutely. Not only we are getting more COVID, we're also dying faster. And we are, one of the communities that has less access to the COVID vaccine now that there is a vaccine. The reason why there are several reasons why. One is that a lot of people in the Latino community in Georgia are recent immigrants like me, right? And with that, we are English learners. So language is a big barrier. as immigrants, Georgia has also several counties that last year had 287G agreements. Those same counties are some of the most populous counties with immigrants, Latino immigrants in particular. And so that also created this fear of community, of the community, you know, having their information shared if they want to get tested or they want to receive health services. The other thing is that we just plainly don't have access to healthcare. The community, Latinx community in Georgia, it's the community that has less access to health services. Georgia is not a state that expanded, right? Medicaid, Medicare, so we just don't have access to it. Also, decades of divestment in Black and Brown communities and areas have created a landscape and you know, that really lacks in infrastructure in our neighborhoods. So we just don't have a lot of hospitals. We just don't have a lot of clinics. We don't have federally qualified clinics, you know, easily accessible for our community. And so also these spaces are those where vaccines are being delivered. So we just don't have them. Public transportation. We don't have expansive public transportation in Georgia. And then the reality is that a lot of our communities are overrepresented in frontline, you know, jobs. So a vast majority of our community works in construction, caregiving, cleaning, maintenance, you know, the healthcare space, as well as manufacturing. The biggest industries in Georgia are, you know, farm working, poultry, and then carpet manufacturing. Overwhelmingly, our community represented. Those are sectors that never closed and that have not enforced any or don't have any mask mandates. So you would see, you know, in a line, you can have, you know, a carpet manufacturing person that's wearing a mask, and then the following three are not. And then masks have been distributed by employers in a really spotty way. So you would get a mask for 5 days to use. If you have any experience working in a manufacturing line, if you sweat, the masks are getting wet, no longer protect you, you don't have a mask. And when Georgia's minimum wage is $5.25, you cannot afford to be purchasing PPE, especially, you know, last year when it was very, very difficult to find it. So it's a number of reasons, you know, it's frontline occupations, it's lack of access to even materials in Spanish. When the state opened its COVID hotline, it was not in any language other than English. And it took us to talk to 6 legislators, including 2 senators, to put pressure to include a language access line for Spanish. That was the only language. And it was very spotty. It took weeks for that to happen. So people didn't even have a space where to report or ask questions about COVID. So largely a lot of the work, you know, relied on organizations like ours, and, you know, dozens of organizations like ours to provide actionable, relevant, accurate information in language that was simple and easy to understand, and that also recognize, like, you know, the transnational nature of this virus. You know, when my family in Peru are hearing one thing, you know, my WhatsApp blows up. And if I don't have clarity that the vaccines they are talking about may be different vaccines from ours, and maybe the treatments that they are using there are different from ours, it becomes really confusing, because you just hear it's the same virus, but information it's totally confusing. So it's very complex, and it's, you know, you think about social determinants of health and how, you know, history comes to show up. It's just terrible. It's just really terrible.
Yeah, it really is heartbreaking and just unbelievable, that language barrier that you've talked about and the lack of consideration. That's something I've heard a lot as well, and it's really hard to understand or believe. What about you personally? And so I've spoken with different people, some of whom have completely isolated themselves, right? And they avoid the grocery stores, they avoid any sort of social gatherings. Other folks who have not so much. There's, you know, a spectrum of ways that people have responded to this. I don't want to say how seriously they've taken it, but sort of like how much they have adhered to guidelines, right? Social distancing guidelines, guidelines about attending events, going out. For you personally, over the past year, what changes have y'all made in your personal life that you think have been pretty important?
Well, we go when we go out, we wear masks all the time. We haven't been, I think, inside a restaurant since we since the state closed, which I remember it was March 17th last year. We have been to a couple of terraces, but we haven't been inside any restaurant. We haven't been to any party or event, anything at all. We still go to the supermarket and do all of that, but we just don't have a social life. Work has become our social life in a way. Yeah, my kids are going to school digitally. They're upstairs.
That's what I wanted to ask you as well. Your children are they elementary school, grade school level?
One is in middle school, one is in high school, and they are both still digital. They go to the Cobb County Public Schools, and that's one of the counties that never went back to classes. So they haven't been in a classroom in a year.
That's hard to believe. Also, what has that been like for them and for you? I mean, just personally, mental health, for their learning, their development, you as a mother watching them, what is that what has this been like for you?
They are old enough, and we are one of the very lucky and privileged people that have internet, right, broadband internet, and also have computers that they can use, and they also speak English. So for them, it's been really hard on the social space, especially for my younger one. It's she's at an age where having the personal interaction helps shape their personality and understand that having friends means also conflict, and how you deal with that conflict and keep friendships is part of the growth that we all of us have, right? And arguably never ends, right? Because you still have those discussions. Because of COVID, I think it's been easier for her to not have those conversations and retreat into the digital space. So she's very much into anime and watching this and playing games, and it worries me. They are happy, healthy girls, and they have taken it the best way I could have possibly expected them to do. I don't have to really worry about them missing class or anything. At the beginning, it was really hard. I had to every hour go back and like open the door, see if they were in the classroom, or like watching YouTube or Pinterest or something. What are you doing? But now I basically, and they hated me for that, right? Because I embarrassed them. But now I trust them more. But there's definitely challenges. I'm sure there's learning loss. It's very overwhelming when they don't understand something and they keep emailing the teacher, and the teacher, I'm sure, gets hundreds of similar emails and cannot get to all of them, and then they bring that frustration back the next day, and the classes are shorter, and it's just really hard. I go to the office twice a week, but my schedule, as you know, even because how hard it is, it's packed. So it's really hard to make sure that they are fed, that we have time to cook, right? And to feed them, because when they were in school, I didn't have to worry about it. They ate there. It's hard. I'm really lucky to have a very supportive husband. So right now, for example, he's cooking rice for the girls so that we could do this interview. But I cannot imagine how, that improbability of any success, for parents, single parents, or parents with challenging, health conditions, or children with challenging learning, disabilities, or, conditions, to just thrive in this environment. I don't think anybody is thriving. We're all still surviving, figuring out how to survive and do the best of it.
Yeah, it's interesting how you frame it as privilege, just having access to some of the basic necessities, right, of life in the 21st century, internet, and just the time as well. What about so mental health issues have been, there's been a lot of studies and news reports on a rise in mental health problems and folks suffering from whether it's anxiety, depression, just coping with a very strange year. Has that been something that has affected you or your family? Just do you feel as if mentally this has been a toll on y'all?
Oh yeah, definitely. Last year I oscillated, like it was like a roller coaster. Sometimes I just felt really depressed, like I just wanted to curl in the sofa and just nobody talk to me for hours. Sometimes little things just were like a trigger. I'm really good at sort of creating silence in my life. But sometimes it was something little and it was almost like the wall, would break down, and it felt totally out of control sometimes. Because we were getting hundreds of messages, right? Every week, I cannot breathe. Can you take care of my kids? Is it okay if I go to the ER? What happens if I get picked up by immigration? Can you make sure that my kids are taken care of? Or, things like that. In our team, all of our team had people die or get really sick. At one point we were having a grantee, and we have these member organizations, right? And we open up weekly calls for people that just felt lonely or whatever, needed support or had questions to call in. So we had every week this half an hour where anybody could just call in and find us there, right? Find our team, be there, try to connect to other members, be there for support. There was one week where people called in, and we were probably like 15 organizations. 70% of them were crying. These are executive directors all crying, like they didn't know how to deal, or they had their own people or their own staff or whatever. So that was really, really hard. Personally, my mother-in-law passed in July, and my husband had to travel back and forth from Puerto Rico for months within COVID. It was really difficult for us as a family, but especially, to him. And I have no doubt it took a toll. He also got really sick in December. He was in the ICU. And
from COVID?
No.
Oh.
No. But we didn't see each other for 3 weeks in the middle of COVID, because it's, you can't see people that are sick. And it was just really difficult for us, but particularly for me, because you're trying to close this year. It's the holidays. You have this organization to run. Staff members, things are falling apart, and then it was really hard.
Yeah, I'm really sorry to hear that. Again, it's just a story that repeated for so many hundreds of thousands of people, right? Over this past year. The vaccine distribution there in Georgia and Atlanta, where y'all are, what has that been like? Have y'all been vaccinated? What is the distribution like? Will you be vaccinated soon? Just how has that been going?
The vaccination distribution has been, and it's still a big challenge in Georgia. I'm sure you saw yesterday that we are last out of all the states. We're still number one for business, though, but we're last in survival. So again, this comes because, one, lack of infrastructure in Black and brown, neighborhoods and areas. So of course vaccines couldn't be distributed, because guess what? We don't have supermarkets, we don't have pharmacies, right? We don't have stadiums, we don't have these massive spaces to do mass vaccination. So that was one of the challenges. Language, Georgia had a completely decentralized approach, unlike states like Virginia, for example, where you fill in your information and they tell you, okay, these are the sites. This is where you have. Georgia has 159 counties. Every single county had a completely different way to do things, with a completely different form, with different venues, and and because there was lack of clarity on the guidance and what, meant being in phase 1 or phase A1 plus in the state, we had lots of confusion and lots of challenges. Out of 159 counties, only 2 had information in Spanish. So again, we go back to language access. Some of the counties, their platforms collapse immediately because of the requests for vaccines. So some of them instituted a waiting list instead of an appointment sign up. What that meant is that you put your name and then you had to be on your computer all day waiting for that email. Nobody that I know has time to do that, especially not those that qualify under phase 1, which is first responders, right? Healthcare workers and seniors. Nobody that has those occupations and not seniors, because likely they have challenges with connectivity, but also, digital literacy and all of that, not even have a computer oftentimes, right? So it was impossible to be there all day on your computer when you get the email to say, oh, you have a slot, sign up right now because it's going to disappear in the next hour. So really impossible to do. The other challenge was that there was really lack of standardized training, and a lot of the pharmacies and small clinics were just using their old forms for vaccines. That most of them have a slot for Social Security and for insurance card. And so for our community members, they were asked by Social Security or by insurance if they said we don't have it or we don't want to share it. They were actually refused the vaccine for a fact. And I am an optimist, even I wouldn't be in this job if I was not. So I want to believe that it was because of lack of training. It wasn't because of discrimination, but it became so, well known. So just, something that happened to so many people that the Attorney General actually had to issue a statement saying that, nobody could be charged because some clinics were charging people, that nobody could be turned away. And so, that happened actually a couple of weeks ago, and it has helped, but also fraud. I mean, there's people always willing to defraud those most vulnerable. So we have seen some people trying to sell vaccines, sell spots online. To me, the greatest challenge is the direction that, the federal government, but then the state provides, the specific guidance. And then, of course, the enforcement, and using an equity lens, right? That actually works. We cannot say we have an equity council or anything if everything is in English and you are not going out and saying in all the ways possible that Social Security is not required, that information is not going to be shared, and that you should not be turned away. So, and those have been some of the challenges. We were able actually to secure last week for the first time from Fulton County 200 vaccines, and we hosted a pop-up event, the first one ever dedicated on Latino seniors. We had 200 seniors there receiving their shot. I mean, it was 100 seniors and 1 caregiver, so 200 people, and they received their first shot, and it was the most wonderful thing to say. I mean, it's engraved in my mind, this 98-year-old that said, this has been the best gift in my entire life. Thank you. I would have never been able to be here, in a little wheelchair. And so, we're going to replicate that 2 weeks from now, and we're getting this trickle down now of vaccines. And hopefully we want to replicate that model and expand it, but it's a model that's really centered on immigrants, where we actually talk to people, help them fill out the information, and we have a one sheet. We don't have to ask them to do internet stuff or anything like that. And then, we have that sheet, and people just bring anything that they can as an ID, everything from a bill to a passport to matricula consular, whatever, to receive the shot. I personally am happy to receive any vaccine people offer me. Yes.
Have you all received one yet though? You, anyone in your family, have you all received one yet?
I have received the first shot, not the second one. Yeah, and I feel terrible. I hope I survived the second one.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Yeah, I hear that a lot. Yeah. I wanted to ask you a follow-up question on, so beyond the difficulties of just getting vaccines to this community, to Latino communities in particular and immigrant communities, have you experienced any like reticence or hesitance among the community to get the vaccine? You know, like people who say, I don't know if I trust this, I don't want this, I don't, and if so, how have you dealt with that?
Yeah, we have, unfortunately, there's still lots of misinformation, conspiracy theories, and just lies about what the vaccines are. Um, Everything from the vaccine is going to make people, women, infertile, to the vaccine is going to kill you. It's a chip that's going to track you to then deport you. It's Bill Gates for like world control or something like that. I still don't understand that one in particular. Why would Bill Gates want to know us all and where we are? I still don't know. You know, the whatever. So we have received, and there is a segment of the community that believes in that, and we have done extensive efforts. In fact, just 2 weeks ago we had a faith conversation with over 20 faith leaders and like 6 local media outlets, because we know that local media outlets and faith leaders are very influential, much more than, you know, national platforms. And we put them together with 6 doctors, 5 or 6 doctors that speak Spanish. The entire thing was in Spanish, to make sure that they had an opportunity. It was a, you know, close, you know, call, not recorded, to make sure they had an opportunity to, you know, just candidly ask the questions that they had. Or we had one person within that call, a faith leader that, you know, has a large congregation, that was convinced that, you know, vaccines create autism, and that Donald Trump is still the president, and that it was for, you know, a tracking basically plan to deport immigrants. It was really interesting to see that and see the reaction of the other faith leaders. I thought it was very educational for all of us, and it was very helpful for the faith leaders to see how it looks. And, you know, most of them were very welcoming of the conversation, and most of them offer their space to become vaccination centers, which, you know, we plan to take advantage of that offer. But there is still a lot of people that believe that. I think the most challenging thing is that a lot of people are getting information, again, that don't trust vaccines from countries of origin. So for example, I was talking to my mom, and my mom was saying, I don't want to take this vaccine, but it's because the vaccines in Peru are, you know, some Chinese vaccines that are only 50%, you know, effective. And so again, if people don't understand that vaccines are different, and maybe different countries have different strategies and whatever, it becomes very confusing why people here, listening to information from wherever country, you know, can assume it's the same thing and then refuse to take it. Largely, the majority of the community we have reached out, they are really interested in the vaccines. The questions that they asked last week, because it's different when they tell you in social media, and then when your people are actually receiving the vaccine and what their caregivers are asking you. Most of the questions were actually around food, and I thought it was so interesting. Can I take a shower? You know, can I eat pork? Is it okay if I eat spicy stuff? Can I still have a, you know, a rum and coke after my? Most of the questions were around food, so we're trying to understand what is that sort of, you know, story there, because we don't know yet. But it was more about aftercare for the vaccine, more than reticence, you know, to take it. Most of them were very excited.
Yeah, again, just a lot of complexity to that issue, right? Very interesting to, I hadn't heard that about the food before. That is an interesting
I know.
detail.
So, yeah, but this is why these community-centered events in a place that feels safe with your own people, they open up this conversation, you know? And it was so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so speaking about, you know, your organization and your community specifically, I want to ask you about the Latino Community Fund. And I'm wondering what drives what seems like a global citizen to become focused on community building and work in Georgia. If you can talk to me about the founding of Latino Community Fund, what led you to found that organization, and then sort of what has been since your founding, And without getting too much into the pandemic for now, what has sort of been y'all's mission and the work that you do?
Yeah. So around 2015, a group of us, around 8 of us, we started just talking about what we could do to move the community forward, to have a community that would be more influential and respected. When I first moved to Georgia, I don't know, like 22 years ago or something, our community was sort of on the rise. There was a Latino-owned bank. We had a senator elected. We have a couple of representatives, and the community was, relatively young, early stages. After it was very clear that the Latino community, how it looks like in Georgia, was here to stay, and it was just not transitional right after the Olympics in '96 to build a, city and the stadiums and the buildings, and then they didn't leave, they actually stayed. Lots of anti-immigrant legislation was passed. It's specifically HB 87, which was a really horrible bill in 2011. And so that immediately curved the community growth. And what we saw, it's a 287G agreements. We saw these governor mandate to unfunded for anybody that wanted to get a business license in Georgia. You have to send an affidavit that you're a citizen. So we saw all of these measures, right, limiting driver's licenses that really impacted and affected the community. And so we were just so tired of not seeing anything good happen for us. And we figured, what if we just pull our dollars together instead of, buying the same $100 chicken for lunch at all of these fundraisers from these established organizations? What if we put our money together and we start actually investing in the small groups that are arising, in response to these challenges? And we know who they are because we are the community. We're all Latinos living in Georgia. We're all of us, immigrants. We know who they are. Funders don't know because there's this breakdown between big philanthropy and sometimes grassroots groups actually doing the work. So what if we join our money and just give it to them? And then, start funding scholarships and start funding all of these things that we believe in and that don't exist in Georgia. So that was the idea, and it took us like a year. We talked about it for like a year, quite frankly, and then for around 6 months we look at models across the country in states where communities were more influential, more visible, where we had more power. And so we identified this model, which is not unique to us, right? We actually modeled after the Jewish Federation, the Hispanic Federation, the Latino Community Foundation of California. There's a Latino Community Fund in Colorado, and so we just modeled as under those successful organizations. And so we are a membership organization, but our membership, it's Latino-led, Latino-serving, Latino-governed organization. That's our base to organize and to ensure that the work that we do is relevant to local communities, right? We believe in being flexible, supporting local leadership, whatever it is, and for us to be sort of this quarterback, right, for all of these community groups. And so we have this pillar that we called amplifying our voice and advancing people's democracy, which includes civic participation, advocacy, but also research to advance who we are as a community, as a relatively new community in Georgia. The second pillar is around capacity building, protecting, building community. And this pillar actually evolved. At the beginning, it was focused on member organizations. How do we strengthen them? But last year, it expanded to the community at large because there was so much need for know your rights, what to expect when you go to, ER, navigating the health system, all of these very pressing and urgent pieces of information. So that's our second pillar. And then the third one is around economic opportunity and scholarships and grants. And so the organizations that we work with to expand their capacity, we actually provide them with grants so that they can advance and continue to, do the work that they do in partnership with our community. So, to briefly answer your question, what led us was disappointment and anger that nothing was changing. And then, more personally, I think there was a very critical moment in my life when my daughter was like, 5 years old or something. She said, are there other Latinas? Are there other people like you and me in Georgia that are not your friends? Because I haven't seen them. And said, sure, there are lots of us. And so I did a search on Google, Latinas in Georgia. And, she was in my lab, and I clicked, hit enter, and pornography came out. That was the only thing, that was on the internet about us. So I said, okay, I need to change this, because it means that nobody has taken the time to write about us in a way that's relevant in the digital space. And how are other people going to find about who we are if all they see, if they are curious and type Latinos in Georgia, it's porn, right? So I started a blog immediately, like that day, and it was called Latino Connection. And it was a blog and opinion on perspectives and what's going on in Georgia from a Latino perspective. And it was focused mostly on Latinas and how we were part of this positive change. And even if you look up Latinas in Georgia right now, even 70% of the content that you'll see is content that we have created at some point, right? So, I started looking at it, and then it was that platform of connection and highlighting people that became part of this Amplifying Our Voice platform of the Latino Community Fund now. So that blog got embedded into the Latino Community Fund. That blog does no longer exist. Now it's just a website of the Latino Community Fund. But, specifically, that was a really important turning point in my life. And then the fact that, when I go to Publix, when I go to, Home Depot, I still very often get asked if I have health insurance or if I clean houses, because people they can only see in me what it's in their minds, what the community is. And I want, my daughters to grow up in a state to see them for their character and their potential, and not through a very narrow and stereotypical lens on, if you look this way, this is what you do in the state. I want to make sure that, people recognize that we are part of the very social and economic fabric of this country and have always been. So I just want to create a better and more welcoming society for people like my daughters.
It sounds, the extent of what y'all are doing, it sounds very broad. Can you, and I'm sure there's a lot of examples that will come to your mind, but can you think of maybe one or two examples of projects or something specifically that y'all were able to do that when you reflect on, you think I'm especially proud of that, like that what we did was really meaningful? And what comes to mind when I ask you that?
One of the projects that we had was, there was just a lack of attention to diverse immigrant leadership in the state. The vast majority of, people that were positioned to be spokespersons were, men, Cuban, like more established sort of, your idea of who, a leader is or whatever. And so what we wanted to do is to literally put Georgia on the map and show that the immigrant experience is a diverse experience, but it is very much interconnected, right? And so we were able to bring the Delivering on the Dream table to Georgia, to the state, in 2018, only 1 year after we incorporated. And the Delivering on the table, it's really, an initiative. It's a national initiative that arose after 2018, after the DACA memorandum from President Obama, to make sure that national philanthropy supported local, state immigrant leadership in whatever the local state leadership decided was important for their own communities. So we were able to raise a little money locally, get a match from the national funders, and fund 10 very diverse immigrant-led, BIPOC-led, LGBTQ-led groups in Georgia in 2018. And for a lot of them, that grant became their largest grant. And so we created this table where it's really a wonderful space of solidarity, peer learning, and peer support, where you can have organizations with different missions as diverse as, the Amani Women's Center, that is group focused in workforce development, for African women, connected to Dignidad Inmigrante, which is a group, led by undocumented organizers in Northeast Georgia, centering on liberation and just basically, expanding legal protections to those that were deported, by ICE. You can, have in the same group Los Vecinos de Beaufort Highway, which is a multiracial, grassroots group that started with a group of high school students asking questions: why is police here not to protect us? And why is it that I have to move from my home from 20 years only because somebody wants to buy a 700,000 townhome next to mine? And so, all of these groups coming together and talking to each other and learning from each other and learning how really incredibly diverse and unique, are all of these realities, but also how similar, was really fabulous. And so these groups have been able to then deploy their own resources and, over their organizing capacity that they have built and networks they have built. They were the ones who also responded to COVID last year, right? And they used the money to, support their own groups. And so when you see that the mayor of Athens, for example, in Georgia, was the only mayor that actually issued a proclamation, really a proclamation against white supremacy, and El Paso, right, shooting that happened, that is because the Dignidad Inmigrante over these 2 years were able to get close to the mayor, to build a relationship, to educate, to have that proximity for the mayor to understand that it was important that, a position was taken. None of that would have happened without, that support. The fact that Vecinos of Beaufort Highway, these high school students are now leading the organization, they were able to develop a tenants' rights workbook in various languages for their own parents and their neighbors, right? Hugely important. So, I can tell you a number of instances, but, investing in being able to create that space for all of these groups to actually see each other, because they didn't know that they existed, right? To support each other, to learn from each other, was really something really exciting about it. The other thing that I'm really proud of is our Latinos for Democracy coalition, which is a coalition that we also started in 2018 with the belief that civic participation is something that all of us do and should do, and that all organizations should incorporate in different ways. So we convene, organize, and then fund this table. And it's right now a group of 7 organizations, all Latino-led, most of us also immigrant-led, dedicated to do work on civic participation every year. Even the years where Georgia is not sexy, nobody sends us money. And do it in a way that incorporates undocumented, documented folks as volunteers, so that it's really a community understanding the connection between direct services and policies, and how the game is played. So before that coalition, there was really one organization doing civic participation for years, very important, doing excellent work. But we really believe that you cannot move the needle with one organization. It has to be everybody doing it, right? And so we have been able every year to expand the coalition, with more funding, a little more capacity, to make sure that this is growing. And so every year we have at least 2 new organizations that say, oh, now I see how my after-school program is connected to the fact that there is no language access policy in the state, because parents don't understand. And so they cannot help their kids. And so the kids fail. And then that's how they ended up in our after school program. Oh, now I understand. Why is it that, this child that has a learning disability, wasn't able to get the support because the parents didn't understand. So that connection between the anchor direct service organization and policy, and then, for that to click and then say, I want to do something about it. It's huge for us. And I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. evidently y'all are a political organization, right? In the sense of like civic engagement, political action, like from the grassroots level, that's hugely political. Um, but I'm interested in knowing how explicitly do y'all participate in electoral politics? Do you endorse candidates? Do you promote candidates? What you're mentioning policy? Are y'all is advocating for specific policy and legislation a big part of what y'all do? Sort of how much do y'all engage with that specific sphere of politics?
Yeah, we are a 501c3 organization, so we are strictly nonpartisan, but we do a lot of advocacy work and a lot of civic participation work from the lens of, this are some of the, these are some of the points in our shared agenda with our members that we believe will create opportunities for our community. So we do have strong positions. For example, that Georgia, a multicultural Georgia is actually an economic imperative. Right now, Georgia is an English only state. So any legislation that is strengthening the fact that Georgia does not incorporate other languages in outreach or in anything, we have a strong position that limits opportunities for Georgia's competitiveness and for our families. And it has a huge impact in workforce development. So we take positions that are connected to issues in our community, but we don't take partisan positions. We don't endorse candidates. We don't train candidates. We don't do any of that. We do work in elections, so we do register people to vote. We do encourage people to mobilize and call their legislators. For example, 531, HB 531, it's an omnibus bill creating restrictions and limitations for voters to participate, was passed 2 days ago in the Georgia House. We have issued a position statement that we believe it is limiting the participation of people in democracy, and that this is a problem for us because we believe that democracy is best when everybody is engaged, and legislators should legislate and protect voters and solve real issues. And there is no problem. I mean, Georgia had a historic turnout in spite of a pandemic. That should be the story of Georgia, not a story of limiting people when they can vote, but expanding those opportunities. So we take positions like that, and we are going to be always very vocal with those. We believe, for example, comprehensive immigration reform, it's important. We believe that creating a path for citizenship and inclusion of essential workers, including undocumented workers, it's important in COVID relief bills. So we will take those positions, but we will never tell people, what to think. We will tell them this is what we believe will affect positively or negatively the community. And if you have a strong opinion, we encourage you to call your legislator and tell them. And we are at the Capitol every day.
Right. So yeah, very political, but just not explicitly partisan.
Correct.
So over the past year, how have y'all, I imagine that working during a pandemic has hampered y'all's ability to be as effective, just because that's what I've heard from organizers from across the country, right? There was most people I speak to say that there's, a period of thinking, of responding, and then trying to, do the same work, but in a different way. How did y'all respond? What do you feel you lost as a result of the pandemic, as far as your work is concerned? How were you able to compensate? Were there new techniques, new strategies that came out of this period that have been very useful? Just overall, professionally, with the work that the Latino Community Fund does, what has this year been like for you?
So, quite frankly, at the very beginning, I really thought maybe this is just going away in a couple months. and we thought our role as, playing these quarterback, right? It's raise as much funds as possible. We launch a COVID-19 relief fund and then funnel those through our member organizations, which are these anchor organizations in all of these, areas responding to whatever is needed to their own communities. And we did that for the first 2 months, March to, actually, it sounds a lot, but it was more like 4 weeks, like a month, like 5 weeks. And then it became really apparent that the need was so vast and great that we had to take a more frontline role. And so by mid-May, our team was also doing food distributions, organizing them. And so, yes, we were still providing grants. And in fact, we re-granted, close to $1 million for COVID relief only. But then separately, we identified the gaps, that existed between the member organization locations and where the community was. And then we hire 4 navigators for, to serve South Georgia, because we didn't have any member organizations in South Georgia, and all the farm workers and, rural communities were left with nothing. So we hired, a few navigators and then a couple of contractors. And then we saw a role, yes, as a, philanthropic intermediary, but then at the same time, what we did is we created this coalition of folks saying, okay, if we are all doing this for Latinos in Georgia, let's come together in this coalition so that we have consistent messaging, and then we can coordinate activities and we can support each other. So we use that delivering on the dream model that I shared with you. We replicated it with everybody doing COVID relief. And so through that, we were able to coordinate, but also lead ourselves. We became one more a direct service organization. We were able to coordinate food distributions, for example, in 8 counties the same day at the same time, and jointly request donations, in-kind donations, messaging, get volunteers, and then so that everybody in the community knew that March, May 21st, whatever, a Sunday from 11 to 2, these were the 7 points in the state where you could get culturally appropriately food for at least one family of 5 for a week. And we put together these boxes, with a list of what was, we talked to folks, we came up with this list of, food that our community, mostly Mexican and Central Americans in Georgia, eat for 1 week for a family of 5. And we said boxes need to have these at the very least, because we want people not to worry about 1 week, right? If you're sick, not to go out. So we were able to work, as a convener, as an organizer, but also as a re-granter. For that, we had to become, get accounts with all of these wholesalers and distributors for PPE. So we bought PPE in bulk and distributed. We bought food in bulk. I still remember one time we had like 87 20-pound sacks of beans, and we had to like open them, and because we had to do it. The other thing that we did was we talked to some of the public health organizations doing the COVID testing, and we redesigned a model that was friendly to immigrants. So then we took that model, with our member organizations to locations within the communities, and we were able to quickly do testing on, heavily dense immigrant locations for thousands of people. And that's how we were able to get some of the first data where we knew that, even though the Georgia dashboard would show that, 1 in 10 maybe, had COVID, or 1 in 15 in the Latino community, it was 1 in 5. And champion with the data that message for additional tests, for additional, outreach, for additional information. So we did a lot.
Yeah, evidently. What when you say immigrant friendly, what is that? Like an immigrant friendly center specifically, what does that look like? What is that design like?
It looks like walk-in and drive-through, because not everybody owns a car, and not everybody can drive or get a driver's license in Georgia. So it also means that you can register on site. It doesn't mean that you have to have access to a computer in advance. It means that the volunteers speak your language, at least half of them. And it also means that, we tell you at the beginning that we are not going to share your information with anybody, other than if you are positive with COVID, or if you are really sick by the time you come to receive the food, that we would have to call an ambulance or something. And it means that you promote it within the community with ethnic media and in your language.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you about specifically the election here in Georgia, the big runoff election. So as someone who has been building community power for these communities that you work with for years now, when you look at the results of the runoff election, Georgia flips blue for first, I don't think since the 90s, right? What do you think are some of the most important factors that contributed to this flip over the past however many years?
Well, one is that the majority of the people that turn out to vote, they turn out to vote for themselves. I don't think they turn out to vote necessarily, from our community, a particular platform. They needed a change. And they knew that they didn't vote for something different, probably wasn't going to get better. This is from, what we have heard. Also, the fact is that the majority of children that are turning 18 from our community are American citizens. So the barriers of language, the barriers of naturalization, the barriers of taking a civics class necessarily are not there for them. And so they are able to participate in the electoral process because it's their right as citizens. And it's also because they have lived within their own experience and bodies what it's not to have a political voice, because their parents didn't have it, because they were immigrants. They probably could not afford a naturalization fee. They probably did not have time to take the English class and drive and get there. So they knew what it means, and they had to turn out to make things better for their community, to create opportunities. I mean, by the time the runoff election came, there were over, I believe, 400 bills pending, sitting in the Senate. Those bills were connected to COVID relief, to entrepreneurship support, to, healthcare, to reproductive health, connected to a number of things that they were interested in for themselves, right? Educational access, scholarships, funding. So our work was really educational, right? This is what's on the line. These are the candidates. And it's only Georgians who get to decide the balance of the Senate for the next 2 years. And so, what are you going to do about it? And these are all the reasons. You can have all of these reasons to vote. You can vote for whoever you want. You just have to have your voice heard, because it's what you do when you are home, and this is what you do to protect your family, to protect your home. You do what you can. So it's a number of things. Is young people turning 18. It's people that didn't vote in the 2016 election recognizing that they did have power, right? When you look at the results from December, and it's only 10, 13,000 votes, the difference. Literally every vote counts. So I think people turned out because they realized, it may be about me voting or not. So it was really interesting.
So as someone who is involved with voter registration, at the very least, involved with the process of the election, do you see anything? Do you have any reason to suspect that there was widespread voter fraud? Is that something that you experienced or saw in your communities, or that you heard through members that you work with?
No. I mean, we follow the numbers. I think the number, even with absentee ballots, that I know there's a lot of talk about it. Yeah, there was absolutely no organized, widespread, or structured fraud at all. In fact, what we saw was a lot of voter intimidation. I was at the precinct during the presidential election, and then also during early voting. During the runoff election. And during the presidential election, I was there offering interpretation services, assistance for anybody who needed. And people were videoing me. They sent police. We were able to help at least 5 people that, because of COVID, the precincts had changed sometime, and sometimes people got confused. And if you're confused and you don't have a lot of time, you still can vote in that precinct. You just need to vote provisional, and then you have up to 3 days to explain why, and cure your ballot and everything. We saw people being turned away even though they could have been offered a provisional ballot. In one instance, I know of a person, because I helped that person, that went 3 times trying to vote. And until the last time, this is a Vietnamese speaker. I don't speak Vietnamese, but we work closely with our partner organizations. So I was on this hotline trying to connect. And that person, it took 3 times for him to vote. And then finally, he was able to vote provisional and his vote to be counted. So there was absolutely no fraud. I think it's been clear by everybody, actually. And it's just a very pervasive narrative. And I am surprised because the people trying to champion these narratives are people that were elected in that elections with those same rules. So I'm not sure if, they're willing to, if there was fraud, they shouldn't have been elected then.
Yeah, it's almost like it doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah.
So seeing the events of January 6th, right, the insurrection at the Capitol, as someone who, and I'm trying to imagine from your perspective, someone who has made, an immigrant who has made this country, it seems like, your home, who evidently cares very much about civic participation and giving people a voice. What was it like for you? I assume, you were watching at least at some point during the day when it was happening. What was it like for you to witness that? And does it worry you about the future of, continuing to build political power, civic power for marginalized Latino communities, immigrant communities? Just what do you think when you think about that day?
It was, for the longest time, I believed like this is not who we are as a country. But that day I thought maybe this is who we really are. We just didn't want to see it until it literally came in front of our faces. So I think trying to grapple with that reality, the fact that this is who we are, people are just hiding it. But then also the understanding that a lot of those people, and I've been, trying to read a lot and understand what happened. For a lot of those people, they just felt so left out and so at odds with people like me, for example. I don't, for no reason, in my opinion, but because of, narratives that tried to pitch people against each other for the longest time, and that they were not heard, that, this talk of, this is, combat narratives and, winners and losers and patriots. How did that, get a grasp of these individuals, so strongly that blinded them in a way that they couldn't see that what they were doing was the furthest away from being a patriot and from being a good citizen and all of these things. I'm just trying to understand. It was very, I don't know. It was just watching a movie. But I was also so afraid because pamphlets about these protests, armed protests and everything were all over downtown Georgia. We had closed our office because we knew people were with weapons were likely to protest. I mean, the mayor's office, the governor's office, all of those were closed. We knew, and we are nobody. So, I don't believe at all that, the federal government was not expected or anything like that, because the pamphlets that we saw on the floor, on the streets in Georgia, were every capital in the US. As far as I know, that's still one of those, it's the main capital of the US. So sort of trying to piece together all of these, this puzzle, it's, I don't know, overwhelming. I think, it's who we are. It's who we are. And I don't know if this is something that you reconcile or something that you work at or something that you handle. I don't know. It's above my pay grade.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I just really have one more question, and it's about, the future. So it seems like normality is on the horizon, or like at least a return to where, masks and the pandemic life is not, such a daily part of our lives. Um, but you've also talked about this push by legislators in, at least in Georgia, to limit voting rights, to limit political participation of communities like the ones you work with. Um, so as you look to the next couple of years, or just to the future, what are you thinking about? What are going to be some of the priorities that y'all will be working with to empower these communities that you work with?
I think, one of really our strategic goals, that was very apparent, that we made intentional last year, was really to learn and be better at building a space of solidarity between Black and Brown communities, and understanding our role as a Latinx organization in upholding or not, right, white supremacy within our own communities. So that's something that we are working through and understanding, and me learning as the executive director, and understanding my role too, and what are some specific things that we could do to dismantle these structures that continue to oppress Black folks, including Black Latinos, right? And how do we uplift those communities in the work that we do? So that's going to be a really critical and central part of how we do work, and the work that we do in our organization. And I think it's important in our community. I mean, history shows that some of the biggest civil rights issues have only been made progress when we all work together, right? Farm Workers Coalition, Rainbow Coalition, you name it. So that's a big thing. The other thing is, because Georgia has, such a relatively new and significant immigrant community, political education on those coalitions, political education on how did we get there here, it's going to be really important for us to share with leaders, with organizers, and also as part of leadership development and the evolution of the movement. But then also political power at the local level. As we grow and as kids turn 18, and as we become more knowledgeable about history and, learn about, the ways we build power and work together, it's always better to start at the local level, where people can see each other and can come together to advocate for opportunities and possibilities for themselves. So how communities engage at the local level, it's going to be a really important piece of what we do. And then really redistricting, it's around the corner, right? Fair maps for all communities, it's going to be really critical to the work that we do. So yeah, a lot.
Yeah, a lot. Y'all have your work cut out for you, but it's been really a pleasure, Gigi, to finally get to speak with you. I'm glad we were able to work it out. It's really, really great work that y'all are doing, and it's inspiring to hear, what y'all have been able to accomplish. So thank you for your work, and thank you also for giving Voces the time today.
Of course, thank you. Even